In the opening scenes, we see the Illinois State Penitentiary. One of the inmates is writing a letter to tell the story that led him here. The morning of October when it all began was a most ordinary one. Charles Shine woke up and had breakfast with his family. His daughter Amy suffers from diabetes, and his wife Deanna works as a teacher. Charles received a call from the hospital. The doctor asked if there were any positive changes in Amy's condition. Charles replied that there weren't. It wasn't getting worse, but it wasn't getting better either. Deanna went to work, and Amy noticed that the relationship between her parents had become colder. Charles barely caught the train to Chicago. At some point, he noticed a beautiful woman. When the conductor came and asked to see the ticket, Charles realized he had forgotten his wallet. The beautiful woman offered to pay for him. It was unexpected for Charles. He sat next to the woman and thanked for her kindness. A conversation started between them. The woman told that she was a financial consultant. In turn, Charles told her he worked in an advertising campaign. Flirting openly with the woman, Charles asked the woman if she always took this train. He wanted to repay her debt. They got off at the same stop and agreed to meet again tomorrow. The woman took it as an invitation for a date. Next for Charles began a normal working day. Businesswoman Susan Davis was unhappy that Charles made the wrong commercial she ordered. Charles had only wanted to approach the work creatively, but no one appreciated it. As a result, the management decided to remove him from the project. Disheartened, Charles faxed Amy's test results to the doctor. His boss Elliot Firth advised him to find a new client as soon as possible. Charles returned home later than usual today. Deanna was about to leave again since there was a parent-teacher conference at school. Before leaving, she asked the husband to help their daughter with her homework and take the dog for a walk. Because of her health problems, Amy has no enthusiasm for studies. Obviously, it's only going to get worse. To dull the stress, Charles drinks. At one point he couldn't take it anymore and cried. When Deanna returned home, she saw her husband in tears and hugged him. It is difficult for both of them, but they must be strong for their daughter. The next morning, Charles boarded the train to Chicago again. Soon the same woman sat next to him, and Charles repaid her debt. The woman noticed a photo of Amy in his wallet. She mentioned that she also had a daughter named Amber and a husband. She and Charles seemed to have a lot in common. Finally, Charles learned the beautiful woman's name. Her name is Lucinda Harris. They chatted the whole way, learning new facts about each other's lives. They were very upset when it was time to get off at the stop. The entire day, Charles could only think about Lucinda. He visited the website of the financial company where she worked and found the phone number. Later, Charles asked his colleague Winston if hypothetically someone had paid for him on the train, would he call that person to thank? That's exactly what Charles intended to do. He hesitated for a long time but eventually called Lucinda's office. Later, they had lunch at a restaurant. Lucinda talked about her husband, who is a broker and is rarely at home. Charles couldn't sleep all night, thinking about Lucinda. Suddenly Amy got worse. This was happening more and more often. Charles's meetings with Lucinda continued. One day he talked about his daughter who has diabetes. He and his wife had to mortgage their house to buy a kidney dialysis machine. The couple is now pinning their hopes on a new medication that has not yet gone through all the trials, but the reviews are promising. Of course, this medication is very expensive and is not covered by health insurance. For years their family had been saving money, so now all they can do is wait for a call. When Deanna returned home with the daughter, she received a call from her husband. Charles lied that his boss assigned him a new major project, so he would be staying late today. Lucinda also made a call to someone. Later, she and Charles were drinking together at a bar. When Charles kissed her, Lucinda didn't object at all. She realizes they are making a fatal mistake. Lucinda confessed that she had never lied to her husband before. Charles assured her that he had also always been faithful to his wife, but now he feels something he has never felt before. The couple hailed a taxi and went to a hotel. At one point, Lucinda hesitated about whether to continue, but eventually gave in. The couple rented a hotel room. Both were silent for a while, feeling a strange but irresistible attraction to each other. Charles asked Lucinda if she wanted to stay or leave. Despite her doubts, Lucinda was about to succumb to passion. At some point, an armed man burst into their room, demanding money. Charles and Lucinda were ready to give him anything, just to make him leave. Taking their wallets and seeing the photos, the robber realized that Charles and Lucinda were not husband and wife. Since they were unfaithful to their spouses, they wouldn't report this to the police, otherwise, their lies would be exposed. Charles attacked the robber, but the man proved stronger. While Charles was semi-conscious, the robber did whatever he wanted with Lucinda. This nightmare went on for a long time. When Charles woke up, Lucinda was sitting on the bed with a blank look. Charles said he would take her to the hospital, but she didn't react. Charles felt helpless. As he was about to call the police, Lucinda asked him to stop. If her husband found out the truth, their family would be destroyed, and that's the last thing she wanted. After tidying up, Lucinda got into a taxi and left. Charles went to work. Of course his colleagues immediately noticed his bruises and injuries. Charles didn't want to talk about it, just saying that he had been robbed. The boss sent him home. He told Deanna the same story he told his colleagues. Naturally, Deanna believed her husband. Suddenly the phone rang. Picking up the receiver and hearing the voice of the robber, Charles was horrified. The criminal wanted to make sure that Charles hadn't contacted the police. Deanna intervened in the conversation from another phone, thinking it was work-related. She said that her husband had a tough day. The man on the line apologized and introduced himself as LaRoche. After hanging up the phone, LaRoche demanded $20,000 from Charles, or else their secret would be exposed. LaRoche made an appointment with him. Charles realized he had no choice. A week later, he met with Lucinda and told her about the blackmail. Charles intends to involve the police, but Lucinda remains against it. Her husband is capable of anything. If he finds out about her infidelity, he will demand a divorce and take their daughter. Lucinda wanted to give Charles part of the sum, but he refused. He was only here to make sure she was okay. Lucinda said they shouldn't see each other anymore. This deeply hurt Charles. Charles had to withdraw money from their family's savings account. The next day, as agreed, he arrived at the meeting place. It was the most disadvantaged neighborhood in the city. LaRoche sent a man named Dexter, who led Charles to a questionable building. LaRoche was waiting for them here and took the money. After that, Charles received a punch and the intruders left. November came. The team presented the commercial for Susan to the boss. It was terrible, but that's what the client wanted. Suddenly Charles confessed to Elliot, who was not only his boss but also his friend, that he had been unfaithful to Deanna. Elliot said it was normal. Many people do the same. Charles wanted to tell Elliot about the blackmail, but he didn't want to listen, considering it a private matter. Charles started smoking again, even though he hadn't done so for years. During a break, Winston told him about his prison past. According to Winston, in such a place, one shouldn't show fear, otherwise it will be hard. These words made Charles think. That same evening on his way home, he received another call from LaRoche, who demanded money again. This time LaRoche wants $100,000. Charles was puzzled about how LaRoche had his number. Realizing the criminal was calling from their home phone, Charles rushed there. LaRoche was talking to Deanna, pretending to be a business associate of Charles. She seemed relaxed and unaware of anything suspicious. Charles doesn't know how to act. All he wants is to settle the score with LaRoche. Amy entered the room. LaRoche began praising her drawings, saying she was very talented. Charles became even more nervous, understanding that his family was in danger. When Deanna and Amy left the room, Charles tried to chase the intruder away, then LaRoche began to threaten him. If Charles doesn't give LaRoche $100,000, his life will be ruined. LaRoche left, and the next day Charles met with his lawyer. Since neither Charles nor Lucinda had involved the police, there was nothing that could be done right now. According to the lawyer, the only option is to persuade Lucinda to go to the police. Charles immediately met with Lucinda and tried to convince her to do so, but she remains adamant about not involving the police. In the evening, Charles, desperate, met Winston at a bar and told him everything that had happened. Winston is certain that the blackmailer will not stop unless he is paid. Charles can no longer afford to pay him, as that the money is set aside for his daughter's treatment. Winston promised to help Charles and intimidate LaRoche. The price of the matter is $10,000. Amy's birthday arrived. Her parents gave her an easel. The girl was thrilled. Soon in the office, the secretary handed Charles a letter from LaRoche, who made an appointment to meet him at the hotel tonight. Charles decided to take Winston's offer and asked his boss for $10,000 in cash, claiming it's for advertising purposes. The guys went to the meeting place together. Winston appeared relaxed and not afraid at all, unlike Charles. Charles became even more frightened when he saw that Winston had a gun. They devised a plan, but before they could do anything, a gunshot rang out. Charles was shocked, realizing that LaRoche had taken Winston's life. He took the envelope, saying that it didn't contain the full amount. LaRoche also stated that he was eliminating anything that gets in his way. Charles understood that the situation was far worse than he thought. LaRoche is a dangerous individual who will stop at nothing. Charles intended to leave, but a woman noticed him. She also noticed Winston in the car. Charles lied that his friend had simply had too much to drink and fell asleep. Suddenly a police car pulled up. The officers found the situation suspicious, but in the end did not check Charles' car. Once the police left, Charles realized he couldn't leave. He had to eliminate the evidence, as he had been seen. From that point on, Charles's life turned into a nightmare. One lie leads to another. It seemed there was no way out. Charles attempted to push Winston's car into the river, but it got stuck. Voices were heard nearby, so Charles had to leave. Even at home, he feels unsafe. The next day, a friend of Winston's from the police, Detective Church, came to the office. He informed them about Winston's demise. Now the officer is questioning all the guy's colleagues. At that moment, Charles received a call from LaRoche, who said that Lucinda was with him. If Charles doesn't deliver 100,000 today, Deanna and Amy will be next. Charles realizes he has no choice. Apologizing to the detective, Charles went to the bank and withdrew $100,000 from the savings account. Later, as agreed, he arrived at the apartment, where LaRoche was already waiting for him. Frightened Lucinda was also here. After getting what they wanted, LaRoche and Dexter left. Tearfully, Lucinda said that those guys had been stalking her. But Charles's situation is even worse now. He no longer has the money for his daughter's treatment. Charles has no idea what to do now. In the evening, he was sitting at the bar when suddenly Detective Church approached him. He knows Charles has something to hide. Charles denied involvement in what happened, but Church had already talked to the bartender and learned that Charles and Winston had been here the day before. The officer left his calling card with Charles and advised him to come to the police station tomorrow with a lawyer. At night, Deanna noticed her husband wasn't sleeping. Charles confessed to making a terrible mistake and told the wife that the money they had been saving was gone. With tears in her eyes, Deanna demanded an explanation of what had happened. Charles no longer intends to lie to his wife. The next day, after telling his lawyer to distract the detective, Charles went to Lucinda's office, but it turned out that the woman was not Lucinda Harris. In fact, her name was Jane, and she was only a temporary secretary to the real Lucinda. Charles realized that his beloved was not who she claimed to be. She was LaRoche's accomplice. It was all part of their gang's plan to extract money from him. Charles found the very apartment that a certain couple had been renting. He immediately suspected it was LaRoche and Jane. She didn't really have a daughter. Amber was just a girl from the commercials. When the train arrived, Charles spotted Jane and discreetly followed her. After escorting her next man to a taxi, she met with LaRoche and Dexter. Charles's worst suspicions were confirmed. In the evening, Charles booked a room in the same hotel and then tracked Jane and new suitor at a restaurant. Later, the couple went to the hotel to get a room. As it turns out, Dexter is an employee of this hotel. As soon as the couple went to their room, LaRoche followed to execute the same plan he had with Charles and then extort money from the man. Charles intended to intervene to prevent this. Meanwhile, LaRoche and Dexter prepared to carry out their sinister plan. But they don't know that Charles has been watching them all this time. Dexter stayed on guard, while LaRoche waited for the right moment to burst into the room. But he didn't make it in time because Charles crept up behind him and attacked, knocking him out. Dexter didn't notice a thing. Taking LaRoche's gun, Charles burst into the room. The man was frightened and offered him money, but that was not why Charles had come here. Jane pretended not to know him, but when Charles told the story of their acquaintance on the train and the fictitious facts of false Lucinda's life, the man realized that he had been ensnared in the deception. He had met Jane in the same way. The man tried to leave, but Charles wouldn't let him. At that moment, LaRoche regained consciousness. Charles demanded his money back. Suddenly the man lunged at Charles, demanding to be let go. A shootout ensued, during which both Jane and the man were fatally wounded. Hearing the gunshots, Dexter burst into the room. Like LaRoche, he paid for it with his life. Each participant in this story got what they deserved. The police arrived. By that time, Charles had already returned to his room, pretending he had nothing to do with it. But Detective Church immediately suspected that something was amiss in this story. Earlier, LaRoche had left the suitcase with Charles' money in the safe. Presenting his documents, Charles reclaimed what was rightfully his. When Charles came to the office the next day, Elliot accused him of theft. Charles remembered that he had taken $10,000 from the company's budget. He didn't deny anything, but refused to reveal the reason he had done it. Elliot said he intends to sue. December arrived. Charles returned the money to the company, but he was sentenced to community service for the theft. Now he is a teacher in a prison. While reviewing homework, Charles read his story in one of the essays. Someone among the inmates knows the truth, including the fact that he was in the room where the shootout happened. Charles tries to figure out who wrote him the letter. In the laundry room, he discovered LaRoche, who as it turns out survived. Now he wants revenge and plans to ruin Charles's life. Suddenly Charles attacked LaRoche, saying he chose this prison himself. He knew LaRoche had survived and planned to finish what he started. And that's exactly what he did. No one accused Charles of anything. Detective Church understands what happened here but intends to keep this secret, as Charles avenged Winston. Charles returned home, where his family was waiting for him. Deanna forgave her husband, and thanks to the innovative medicine, Amy is feeling much better.